So I am the Chief Executive of Spectrum Centre for Independent Living. I ran my own computer consultancy for 15 years before joining Spectrum in 1995, January 1995. And I did that to develop direct payment support services for people living in Hampshire. That was before Southampton and Portsmouth split off at that time. And I became Chief Executive, or the role that's now called Chief Executive, in 1998. I'm actively involved with several other organisations controlled by disabled people, including Disability Rights UK, and I've also served on a number of influential bodies locally, regionally and nationally, and I helped to co-found SENPO, which is the South East Network of Disabled People's Organisations. I am evangelical about the social model of disability and independent living. That's what floats my boat, that's what gets me up in the morning, and it's what turned this job as from an interim making do job until I got my business re-established when I moved to Southampton to something that's my vocation, and I learned that pretty quickly through it. And so I am evangelical about that, and also the strength and power of disabled people's organisations, user-led organisations as well. I want to introduce my two colleagues on the table as well. We've also got in the first session Ruth Dixon. She is a qualified social worker with a master's degree in public service management. She's had a long and varied career in adult social care and the NHS, working in a wide range of settings and roles which have included practitioner learning and development, policy, project and management posts. Her current role is with Hampshire County Council Adult Services, where she is Deputy Director with responsibility for care and commissioning. She is a member of the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, and she works in the Older Persons Network and has recently taken on the ADASS as lead for end-of-life care. And throughout her career, Ruth has been driven by the values of compassion, justice and equality, with a focus on the importance of every individual and building positive relationships and partnerships. Her passions alongside her work are her family, gardening, music and people. So welcome, Ruth. Thank you for coming today. Frances Hasler is our other speaker in the first session. She divides her time between London, where she is a Director of Health Watch in Camden, and Sussex, where she is a lay board member of a local clinical commissioning group. Previously, she's worked for the Health and Social Care Regulator, the Care Quality Commission, where she led work on user involvement and was seconded to the Department of Health to help create the Health Watch network. For nearly 25 years, Frances worked in organisations of disabled people, locally, regionally and nationally. She founded the National Centre of Independent Living in partnership with Jane Campbell, and developed it into a key national body and an authoritative source of information and support on direct payments. And this led to a network of local centres for independent living as well. Through research, lobbying and working directly with government, that's really how she's developed her roles over the years, and she's been the lead author in the Direct Routes to Independence, which was the first guide to implementing the Direct Payments Act. She's an acknowledged expert in independent living in the UK and Europe, and she has served on numerous government advisory groups, most recently the Right to Control pilot. And that's our three speakers today. So I joined, as I said earlier, I joined Spectrum in January 1995, which is almost 20 years ago, quite worrying. When I joined, it was the stopgap, and it was initially an 18-month contract, and I'm still here 20 years ago, so I guess I did realise pretty quickly that this is the place for me, a place where I belong, and I think I previously looked for around 32 years before I did find that place, and I'm very pleased that I have it now. Much of the successes we'll talk about today are accepted givens in our modern society, and few disabled people even consider the reality of the lives of our fellow disabled people just a generation or two before. We've been doing a lot of work recently, which we'll talk later about the history of the organisation and the movement. Working on that research has been a real eye-opener for me, particularly as to what life really was like before 1984 for disabled people Because if we look back to then, independent living had only just started, literally. A small handful of people this time 30 years ago who were independent living, and you still needed doctors, assessments and agreements to do virtually anything in your life. So going to university, going to work, all of those things. That doctors had power over us and had power to allow or deny what we wanted to do. And if we're talking about access to public buildings, shops and pubs, well, that was very much the exception, whereas I believe it's much more the norm nowadays. 1983 was the year that the social model of disability was named that. So, we're talking about, real things that we take as given nowadays that had only just been defined and named at that time. And over the last 30 years, maybe 40 years, disabled people have, I believe, been at the forefront of every progressive social policy advance, and we've defined the philosophies that were at the time labelled as irresponsible and sometimes downright dangerous. But the same philosophies are now ubiquitous and accepted, and I think we should remember that as real achievements for what we've done over those years. But make no mistake, every inch or every centimetre maybe has had to be fought over. And as in any fight, we've had a great many casualties, much heartache and injustice, and indeed there are many people not here today to see the results of that hard work. But we did it. Disabled people have done all of that, disabled people and their allies, and we have changed the world, and we've created a world that's much more inclusive of us nowadays. We still only scratched the surface maybe, but nevertheless we have a world where we can all be here today, and that simply would not have been possible 30 years ago. Looking at today, direct payments and personal budgets is the preferred option. Access is much better, and work and learning and work opportunities for disabled people are much more common, and we can debate about what's happening in the current arena later on that might be challenging that, but it's certainly much more common and accessible now, and many of the barriers have been removed or at least partially dismantled for people. Spectrum and the independent living movement has shown many times what is possible given the right support, the right empowerment, and helping disabled people to thrive and become leaders throughout the UK and the world. And those very same disabled people who others discarded as being beyond hope or systematically abused, we pioneered peer support as the empowering support model. We showed that empowerment works, and that's something I think we should be very proud of, and we also showed that it's economically much more cost effective than services that disempower people. But for all we've won, we've still only scratched the surface, and empowerment is not available for all still, and what rights we do have are still rare and often with loads of caveats around whether we can afford it or not. So many of the things that we call rights are actually not rights, they're there by goodwill largely rather than by rights. So we have made great progress, but we still denied many things that need to be in place by right. And at the very time that we're celebrating the achievements today and over the last 30 years, independent living and choice and control are under renewed threat as a result of severe pressures on public finances. And if you believe the rhetoric around disabled people being relabelled as a burden to society, and I do believe that that is the case, we find ourselves the focus of much of the impact of public spending cuts, when in point of fact, if you look at, there was a BBC report just yesterday that highlighted that actually welfare spending may be 25% overall, but it's, when you look at what's actually spent on disabled people's services, it's actually only 4%. And so there's an awful lot of rhetoric about us being too expensive and a burden on the state. When you look at it in that sense, it's only 4% of an overall 25% of welfare spending. And we're seeing increased levels of hate crime. We had a hate crime conference just over a week ago, and is it any wonder with the amount of press and government rhetoric around disabled people and being scroungers, and we're even talking about the deserving and undeserving poor again, and researching our book, those terms should have gone out with Victorian changes, but sadly they're coming back to us today. So for Spectrum, being able to rise to the new challenges has probably never been as important as it is now. The climate in which Spectrum operates has changed rapidly over the last few years, with major changes in both the way that user-led organisations are funded and the way that public services are commissioned and delivered. And to thrive in this environment, I believe we need to recognise that we need to become more enterprise-focused, strategically positioning ourselves to deliver services more focused on the benefits of the personalisation agenda and the big society, and the welfare and health and social care reforms. But we also have to lead the way in showing that independent living is not just a social care issue, but an issue that affects the whole of society, including transport, housing, politics, employment, to name a few. And that's why we've got 12 basic rights to independent living, to make the point that social care is a means to an end, not an end in its own right, and thank goodness for that, the way funding is at the moment. Sorry, I'm off script there. This is both a challenge and an opportunity. We need to establish the right balance between taking advantage of the opportunities that lay ahead, whilst at the same time remaining true to the things that are important to Spectrum and to our members. In particular, we need to think hard about how we achieve the right balance between service provision and campaign and advocacy work, and how we can ensure that the resources we need to put towards service development and income generation do not compromise those other core activities. We also need to consider how we can diversify the range of our activities and user base, whilst at the same time maintaining a clear focus and clear identity. To show and keep on showing that our philosophy is a world away from the traditional charity-based support and patronage that we still have to endure far too often. There also remains a long-standing challenge of how to ensure that the benefits of choice and control are universally available. The model of independent living, as originally developed by Disabled People's Organisation, was a product of its specific historical time. And from the start, there's been concerns that it might not be a precise fit for all disabled people. And I'm thinking of people with mental health difficulties and older people particularly, but there are others. There's been a progressive adaptation over the years, and more recently, at least in theory, extended choice and control to all disabled people and all user groups. But we are still some way off achieving universal access to the benefits of independent living, and so there is still much more to be done. So anyone who feels a job is done and that the only barrier is austerity, then I think we need to wake up and smell the coffee. There's many barriers other than the financial. In fact, I believe the financial is probably one of the least of our barriers still. The challenge is to find new ways, new and creative ways to develop care and support that matches the needs and wishes of all groups, and to build stronger collective resources and partnerships without losing sight of the essential principles of choice and control. And of course, the world doesn't stand still while we grapple with these challenges. No sooner do we start to get to grips with one challenge, then another one comes along. Such is the pace of change in the world today. Our care and support system has already struggled to cope even before the financial meltdown. Now it is literally coming apart at the seams. We cannot continue to keep spreading the jam thinner. Radical solutions are necessary. Disabled people know many of the answers. After all, we live every single day of our lives with the consequences of short-sighted thinking and decisions made by people that don't have the slightest idea what our lives are really like. And so I say to you today, listen to us, trust us, work with us, and co-produce with us, not against us. Challenges don't come any bigger than the challenges associated with an ageing society. Increased life expectancy, combined with changes in the nature of family life and household structures, mean more and more people need support for longer and longer in their lives. And whether through choice or necessity, people are also working longer and many predict that working in our 60s and even our 70s may become the new norm. So for older disabled people, independent living will become inextricably linked to economic well-being to an even greater extent than it is already. And continuing on this ageing theme, the predicted increase in the prevalence of people with dementia will also create new challenges for independent living, and those will require new solutions as well. But I tell you now, there is no need to reinvent the wheel. As we have already shown time and time again, what works to empower disabled people from one group invariably works in other groups. Every single time we're told, oh, but it's different for this group, and every single time we show that the basic principles remain the same. And I'd say independent living works, period. The nature of the challenges we face may be new, but it doesn't mean we need to rip up the blueprint that's served us well for the last 30 years. We've always faced challenges, and it's sometimes easy to forget that it's not that long ago that most people believed that independent living itself was an impossible pipe dream. That challenge hasn't just been overcome, it's been totally demolished by the simple but powerful idea that disabled people developing their own solutions to whatever problems we faced. So we've done it before, and working together, I believe we can do it again. Thank you very much.